Hi, welcome to lesson 6 on the idiographic and nomothetic approach. In today's session, we're going to look at the two approaches and how they apply to psychological investigations. Let's begin with a definition then. So the idiographic approach essentially refers to the scientific investigation of individuals, though we'll see whether or not it's scientific later on. This is distinct from the idea of generating laws that can then be generalized. So idios means private or own, and therefore we're looking at the study of specific individuals rather than groups that we can generalize from. The idiographic approach then to psychological investigations. It's interested in studying the individual as a unique person with insights and that can tell the researcher something about the psychology of that individual. Uses qualitative methods, very similar to the sort of holistic approach. We study unique individuals in depth rather than studying lots and lots of people and generalizing by making laws. Focus on quality rather than quantity of information, so we're big on qualitative methods. Common research methods are things like thematic analysis, unstructured interviews, and so forth. Examples of the idiographic approach, well, obviously Freud used a mixture of approaches, but in his case study, for example, of Little Hands, it ran to about 150 pages. It contained verbatim notes from himself, his father, and some of his theories and ideas and interpretations as well. Humanism is also an idiographic approach. It sees the world through the perspective of the individual, and it's not concerned about subjectivity. The nomothetic approach then is the opposite of that. It's about conducting tests on large numbers of people and drawing nomos, which means law. Drawing laws about them. So a classic example would be something like Skinner's law of operant conditioning, or his laws of learning, I should say. Operant conditioning applies to all people at all times. Nomothetic approach then. It's interested in studying large groups, generalize our findings, develop laws about how humans behave, and hopefully predict their behavior as well. It relies on quantitative methods, lab experiments, and we deal with large data sets. And this is interesting because we use things like central tendency measures, we use dispersion, we use statistical analysis to generate some finding, interpret our findings, and then say, okay, this says something about X group of people. So that's the nomothetic approach. There's quite a good article on possibly the world's largest virtual psychology lab. It's not really a psychology lab, it's actually a video game that's played online. It has about 24 million members. But it's being used by researchers who are data mining it to conduct their own research. Examples of nomothetic approach then. Cognitive psychology, think about it, we take, not developed general, we take models and we generalize them to entire populations. We carry out basic experiments like on memory capacity, coding, and then we generalize it pretty much to all humans. That is a nomothetic approach. And 7 plus or minus 2, the magic number, as discovered by Jacob/Miller/ lots of other people. That's an example of a nomothetic finding. Yeah, millions of people have conducted over the years Jacob's digit span task, and the findings are fairly robust. Biological approach, this is a nomothetic. It tries to draw conclusions from biological research. One example is the fight-or-flight mechanism, which was generalized to both males and females, and it's suggested now that that may have been premature, because it seems to be the case that the fight or flight response in women may be different. It may be more attend and befriend, as some researchers have labelled it. So that's the biological approach. Behaviourism generates laws, classical conditioning, operant conditioning and so forth. And how is it applied? Think about in psychopathology. The DSM is the diagnostic statistical measure, and that is essentially a nomothetic document. It seeks to generalize. If you have these symptoms, chances are you have this disorder. Right, evaluation then. One of the strengths of the idiographic approach is that it focuses very much on the individual. It restores the human as a whole at the centre of psychology, which the reductionist approaches all kind of took them out of the equation. No, we just want to focus on this aspect or this aspect. And actually, this is really important because we are human, we are complex beings. Idiographic suggests there's far too much emphasis on data and measurement and not enough on the holistic assessment of an individual. Allport, who we'll come across again in a bit, applied the terms to personality, and he felt that these sort of reductionist and nomothetic approaches to personality were missing important features of the way people actually behave and their personality characteristics. He argued that only by knowing the individual as an individual can you actually predict any real behaviour. Scientific basis though. Big limitation of the idiographic approach is it's not science. Positive psychology was born out of humanism actually, because humanism was too idiographic. So positive psychology was born out of it and seeks to restore a sort of evidence-based approach. Some idiographic techniques are evidence-based, like case studies and thematic analysis and stuff like that. And they do try to remain objective. Remember the concept reflexivity, which we come across a few lessons back. This is key of qualitative research. And it allows, for example, the researcher to identify any bias that might exist. And this is the strength of using this approach. Predictions. The big limitation in the idiographic approach is the ability for it to actually make predictions about behaviour. So Skinner and Pavlov, they can predict exactly how the dog will behave, or the pigeon or the rat, and any pigeon or rat in the same circumstance. This is a powerful tool to generalise and work out and predict future behaviour. Idiographic, much less useful in that term, because you're studying an individual, and the features that may make that individual behave the way he does may not be present in another individual. So you can't make the same sort of predictions. Personal therapies, which are developed using the idiographic approach, very time consuming, huge investment needed. However, Allport challenged this. He says that actually you can generalize the results and come up with general laws and predictions if you do a few in-depth analyses on a number of different people. So you carry out a handful, and then you can make these generalizations, and they're generally more informed. But then this actually leads to the criticism that Allport is adopting a nomothetic approach, because he's drawing up laws, he's generalizing. So is it really even idiographic? Time consuming. Idiographic is massively time consuming. Collecting data takes a while in nomothetic context, but once you've established your test or you've written your questionnaire, you can just hand it out to as many people as you can find. But every time you start a new idiographic study, you're essentially starting from scratch. In some ways, the idiographies are very similar to the ethnographies that we talked about in culture bias. Remember, ethnographies are these huge tomes that describe every little detail about a particular cultural group. You couldn't take an ethnography on the Samoans or the Zambians that we talked about, or the Inuit, and apply it to a different ethnic group. It just wouldn't work. You'd have to start from scratch and produce a new ethnography based on those individuals. So Holt attempts to solve the problem and suggests that actually there is no real separation of the two approaches. Both are nomothetic, essentially, because they both develop general principles of behaviour and try to explain and predict behaviour. Millan and Davis in 1996, they argue one solution to this is to begin with a nomothetic approach and then move towards a more idiographic approach later. And that means that we can generate these general principles and then go deeper in our idiographic studies to really find out why these principles work. So essentially you can cover the how and the why. Freud used both approaches, psychometric testing as well as really in-depth studies like Little Hans. Different approaches. Here's a quick example then. Two leading personality researchers of the 20th century, Hans Eysenck and Allport. These two researchers take different approaches. So Allport's approach is to analyse 301 letters from a middle-aged woman to himself and his wife. I'm not sure how representative they are as the receivers of letters, but his students analysed it using a sort of thematic analysis, very, very idiographic. Eysenck broke personality down into basic components that he could then generalise. His Big Five measures personality along a series of dimensions. You answer the questionnaire, you get a score. That score tells you where you fit. Now, this can be quite an informative tool, and we can make generalisations about the sort of people who have certain personality type. With Allport, this is much more difficult. The analysis is based on a single individual. I think we will leave it there and we'll start ethics another time because it's quite a big topic. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. Fill up that margin with questions. Make sure you've got tons and tons of questions. That's what the class sessions should be all about. If you do have any questions, email, write them, bring them, post them, whatever works. Just get them to me and I'll see if I can answer them. As always, thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in class.